Okay, the first one is from an anonymous viewer who says, I've heard that Islam is a religion of peace and that terrorists are just a small fringe percentage of Muslims. What's the truth?
Islam means submission, and it means submission to Sharia, submission to the law. And as we've already explained in this program, there's no assurance that you've done it right. And even Muhammad would pray, he said, 100 times a day. I would ask for forgiveness. Now, there are a lot of laws in Sharia. There are a lot of things to do. The primary one is to pray 5 times a day. Then you've got to fast for the month of Ramadan. And all of this is required, but even after you execute on all of that, there's no assurance for you that you're going to go to paradise. So there's an absolute way that if in the struggle, the jihad, for establishing Sharia in a land, if in that struggle you die, then you get automatic entry to paradise. But there's no assurance if you try to observe Sharia and do what's required under Islam that you're going to get it. So to say it's a religion of peace, just look at the history. And look at the history of expansion and how has Islam expanded over the centuries, and you'll get a pretty clear picture.
Well, this is Carrie who says, I know there are violent verses in the Koran, but there are violent verses in the Bible. How can you say that the Koran mandates violence, but the Bible does not?
Well, the Bible, the verses on violence are all part of the Old Testament in terms of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And it's all about justice and essentially retribution for wrongs done, that there's then a need for retribution. There's also, in the taking of the Promised Land, some pretty incredible battles and pretty incredible violence. But then you have Jesus who comes, and he says there's only really 2 laws that you have to do. 1, love God with all your heart, and 2, love your neighbor as yourself. If you do these things, then you will be right with God. And then he adds a wonderful kicker, love your enemies. Do good to those who persecute you. Those are all brand new. I mean, that's a brand new thought. The first 2 you find in Deuteronomy. But loving your enemy, that's something new. And then Paul adds to it a wonderful verse in 1 Corinthians. Love never fails. When you look at the history of the Koran, it starts off, Muhammad, with lots of verses about peace, and then he turns to violence as a way to expand the religion. You look at Christianity, Old Testament, it's about retribution, but then you get into the law of love.